The spring of 1945 arrived not with flowers, but with silence. Germany had stopped breathing. Cities lay in gray heaps of rubble, trains no longer ran, and the roads that once carried soldiers to the front now carried them backward, toward captivity. Among them was Anna Weiss, a 26-year-old field nurse from Hamburg. She had tended to the dying on every front, Stalingrad, Arnhem, Aachen, patching together broken men for a war that was already lost. When her field hospital was overrun by British forces near Minster in early April, she didn't resist. She simply raised her hands, her uniform stiff with blood that wasn't her own. That was the moment her war ended, or so she thought. The British soldiers who captured her were polite, almost painfully so. One of them even offered her a cigarette. It was this civility that frightened her most. For years she had been told what happened to women taken by the enemy. The words Russians and revenge were whispered like curses in the medical tents. Yet now she found herself standing in the open, surrounded by men in khaki who didn't even raise their voices. They took her to a temporary holding camp outside Osnabrück. Barbed wire, wooden huts, mud that swallowed her boots with every step. Thousands of prisoners, soldiers, nurses, clerks, drivers, all stripped of insignia, of rank, of purpose. But even among prisoners, nurses were needed. 3 days after arrival, a British officer approached her. He was tall, serious, with a face weathered by too many campaigns. His name was Major Richard Harding, Royal Army Medical Corps. He spoke German haltingly. "You were a nurse?" "Yes." "Then you will help in the infirmary. We have too many wounded, ours and yours." Anna nodded. She didn't dare to refuse. And just like that, captivity became duty once more. The camp infirmary was a converted horse stable. Wooden stalls divided into makeshift wards, beds made from pallets, straw mattresses, and blankets stamped with red crosses. The air smelled of disinfectant, coal smoke, and despair. Inside, Anna found other women like herself. Greta Müller, a midwife from Cologne, Lieselot Hartmann, a Red Cross volunteer, and Sophie Engel, barely 19, who had lied about her age to join the Wehrmacht Nursing Corps. They had once worn immaculate white uniforms with eagle insignias. Now they wore shapeless gray prisoner coats marked PW. Still, old habits survived. They scrubbed, folded, and sterilized until the place began to look less like a stable and more like a hospital. Their patients were not only German. Half the cots were occupied by Allied soldiers, men pulled from the front lines, frostbitten, half-starved, shell-shocked. The first time Anna was told to change the bandages of a British sergeant, her hands trembled. She had seen Allied bombers obliterate Hamburg. Her own mother had died under their firestorms. Now she was expected to heal one of them. The sergeant, a young man with red hair and an accent she couldn't place, winced as she unwound the blood-soaked gauze. "You're trembling," he muttered. Anna said nothing. "Afraid of me?" She looked up, startled. His expression wasn't cruel, just tired. "I'm not afraid," she said quietly. "Only not used to this." He gave a faint, weary smile. "None of us are." That was their first conversation. Neither forgot it. Days blurred into weeks. The war outside shrank to rumors. Berlin surrounded, the Führer vanished, the Reich dissolving like smoke. Inside the camp, life narrowed to routines. Wash, feed, dress wounds. Every morning, a whistle blew. Every evening, the guards locked the gates. Yet between those hours, something fragile began to grow, a rhythm not of battle but of survival. Greta, once a proud believer in the regime, began to soften.
She whispered to Anna one evening, wrapping bandages in the lamplight. "They treat us like people. Do you think they know what we were told about them?" "They must, and maybe they want to prove it false." Yet not all prisoners accepted this uneasy peace. Some whispered that cooperation was betrayal, that healing the enemy meant dishonoring their fallen. But Anna ignored them. She had seen enough of dying to know that compassion was not treason. By May 8th, the rumors became fact. The loudspeakers crackled. Germany had surrendered. In the camp, there was no cheering, no singing, just a hollow quiet, broken only by the sound of wind over wire. That night, Anna sat outside the infirmary, staring at the sky. For the first time since she was 16, there were no searchlights, no sirens, no bombers, only stars. Greta joined her, hands wrapped around a tin mug of weak coffee. "It's over," she said softly. Anna nodded. "Then why does it feel like it's only beginning?" Greta didn't answer. In the weeks after surrender, Allied policy shifted. Male POWs were to be processed for labor assignments. Female medical personnel, those with no political record, were to assist in humanitarian zones. To Anna's surprise, she and the others were not sent to labor camps, but to a repatriation hospital for displaced persons, Allied and Axis alike. It was an experiment, Major Harding explained. He said, "Medicine is a neutral ground." They were moved to Camp Ashbury, a converted airfield in northern France, rows of barracks, a mess hall, a Red Cross flag fluttering where the Luftwaffe once parked its planes. The nurses were quartered separately, but worked alongside Allied staff. At first, the British and Canadian medics avoided them, offering curt orders and colder looks. But necessity broke barriers faster than kindness. When dysentery swept through the camp, Anna worked 18-hour shifts without complaint. When supplies ran short, Greta improvised bandages from torn sheets. When a French child wandered in from a bombed village, Lieselot sat by his bed all night until he could speak again. Gradually, suspicion gave way to respect. Major Harding began to trust their judgment. He let Anna sign medical reports. He gave Greta authority over sanitation. He even shared his rationed cigarettes with them. For women who had expected humiliation, such gestures felt almost unbearable. One afternoon, Anna caught her reflection in the infirmary window. Her hair was pinned back neatly, her sleeves rolled to the elbow, her hands steady as she stitched a wound. She realized she looked less like a prisoner and more like a nurse again. Not a German nurse, just a nurse. That night, she wrote in her journal, "Perhaps mercy is a uniform too, if you learn to wear it." By June, the camp had transformed. Allied soldiers recovering from battle now shared space with former enemies. The ward became a strange sanctuary, one where language mattered less than gesture. A hand passing water, a nod of thanks, a smile that crossed nations. Greta called it the enemy ward, but the name slowly lost its sting. One day, the red-haired British sergeant from the early weeks, Thomas Boyd, was discharged from the infirmary. He limped to the door, then turned back to Anna. "Thank you," he said in careful German. "For what?" she asked. "For treating me like a man, not an enemy." He extended his hand. She took it. His palm was warm, rough, human. No propaganda film had ever prepared her for that. Outside, the war's echoes still raged. Trials, ruins, refugees, hunger. But inside Camp Ashbury, something different was happening. Former enemies were learning to coexist. Not easily, not perfectly, but honestly. On a warm evening in late July, Anna and the other nurses stood by the fence, watching the sun dip below the airfield. Beyond the wire, French villagers walked home with baskets of bread. For the first time in years, The air smelled of baking, not burning. Greta murmured, "Do you think we'll ever go home?" Anna replied, "When they stop seeing uniforms." She paused, then added, "And when we do too." The next morning brought new orders. A shipment of refugees was arriving from the east, survivors of camps liberated by the Allies. They would need medical care, food, compassion. And the only nurses available were German prisoners. Anna read the assignment list with shaking hands. To tend to the people her nation had destroyed. There would be no greater test of what she had learned. But she did not turn away. She closed her journal and whispered the same words she had spoken when she first entered the infirmary. Duty before fear. Only this time, it meant
The trucks came before dawn. From the airfield road, a thin mist clung to the grass, silver in the early light. The sentries opened the gate, and a convoy rolled in, canvas-covered lorries carrying not soldiers this time, but shadows of what the war had left behind. They were civilians, displaced persons, survivors of the camps to the east. Men and women, children clutching bundles, faces pale beneath soot and dust. Some wore striped jackets, others were wrapped in British blankets, too large for their frames. Their eyes, those eyes, looked neither afraid nor grateful, only exhausted. Anna Weiss stood by the infirmary door as the truck stopped. Behind her, the other German nurses waited in silence. None had spoken since the orders came the night before. Assist the displaced arrivals. Treat all patients equally. Simple words on paper, difficult in a heart. A British corporal shouted instructions. The refugees were to be deloused, examined, then assigned to recovery wards. Major Harding turned to Anna. "You'll triage the women's section," he said. "Yes, sir." Her voice held steady, but inside she felt the weight of 1,000 unspoken histories pressing on her chest. The first woman she treated could not have been older than 20. Dark hair cropped short, numbers tattooed on her arm. The chart said only, name, unknown. Language, Polish. Anna knelt, cleaning the raw skin where the girl's wrists still bore iron bruises. When she reached for antiseptic, the girl flinched. Anna froze too, realizing what that movement meant. She set the bottle down slowly. "It's all right," she whispered in German. Then, softly, in broken Polish, "Nie boli, it doesn't hurt." The girl's eyes flickered, confused recognition. For a moment, language didn't matter. The touch of gentle hands did. Across the ward, Greta and Lieselot worked among rows of cots. Greta, once the proud midwife of Cologne, now spoon-fed a French child who had lost both parents. Lieselot stitched a blanket for an old man who refused to sleep indoors. He said walls made it hard to breathe. No one asked what they had endured. Every scar spoke for itself. By evening, the ward had filled beyond capacity. The air carried the faint, sterile smell of carbolic mixed with the musk of sweat and sickness. But beneath it was another scent Anna could not name, a kind of rebirth. She saw it in the way a boy clutched a cup of warm milk as though it were a treasure, or how two sisters, reunited by chance, fell asleep holding hands. Days became weeks. The enemy ward was now divided not by sides, but by needs: malnutrition, fever, trauma. British, Polish, French, German, all under one roof. Major Harding moved between beds with quiet efficiency, issuing orders that no one questioned. He treated Anna and the others not as prisoners, but as colleagues. When supplies short, he petitioned the Red Cross. When prejudice flared among guards,
he silenced it with a single sentence. "We are not here to judge. We are here to heal." Anna had once believed that healing belonged only to the innocent. But each bandage she wrapped around a survivor's arm, each cup of water she lifted to trembling lips, made that belief smaller, thinner, until it was gone. One afternoon, a nurse from the other side approached her, a Scottish woman named Mary Douglas. Until then, Mary had spoken to her only in clipped, professional phrases. But that day, she hesitated, holding a clipboard. "You've done good work," she said finally. "The Pools trust you." Anna blinked in surprise. "I didn't expect they ever could." Mary's expression softened. "Trust grows, same as wounds heal. Slowly, but it does." It was the first compliment Anna had received in English. It sounded strange and beautiful. Among the patients was an elderly rabbi from Krakow named Elias Stein. He rarely spoke, but always carried a small, torn prayer book. Anna often found him tracing invisible letters on his blanket, as if rewriting the lost pages. One evening, she brought him tea. He looked up at her German uniform, still marked P.W., and said, in hesitant English, "You are a nurse." "Yes." "You are German." "Yes." He nodded slowly, then smiled faintly. "Then you are both question and answer." She didn't understand at first, but later, lying awake, she thought of his words. Perhaps reconciliation was not an agreement, but a question one kept choosing to ask and answer with kindness. Summer arrived over northern France. The barracks windows stood open and sunlight poured into the infirmary. Children began to laugh again in the yard. The camp no longer smelled of disinfectant, but of grass and bread from the village bakery beyond the fence. In the evenings, the nurses and allied staff sat outside sharing stories. Mary taught Anna English idioms. Greta traded recipes with a Canadian orderly. Even the guards joined in quiet conversation, amazed at how normal the world could feel again. One night, as the stars emerged, Major Harding found Anna sitting by the fence. "You've done well here," he said. "It's not me, it's them, the survivors. They remind us how to live." He nodded. "Perhaps that's why we needed you here." Anna looked toward the camp lights flickering across the field. "For a long time, I thought being German meant carrying a shadow." "Maybe it still does," Harding replied gently. "But you're helping light the lamps." In early August, orders came from headquarters. Some German medical prisoners were to be released and repatriated. Anna's name was on the list. When she read it, her first feeling was not relief, but uncertainty. Home. What did that word even mean now? Hamburg was rubble, her family gone. The country she had served had vanished. That evening, she went to the infirmary one last time. The Polish girl she had first treated months earlier was now walking, her cheeks fuller, her hair growing back. When Anna told her she was leaving, the girl reached into her pocket and pressed something into her hand. A small cloth badge, the kind once sewn onto prisoner uniforms. Anna stared at it, speechless. The girl smiled. "You keep, to remember, people can change." Anna wanted to speak, but couldn't. Instead, she nodded, tears blurring the room into shapes of light. The next morning, she stood at the camp gate with Greta and Lieselotte and Sophie. Behind them, the survivors waved, some smiling, some simply watching in silence. Ahead lay the road to Germany, a land still broken, but waiting. As the trucks pulled away, Anna opened her hand. The small badge lay in her palm, its edges frayed, but whole. In that moment, she realized mercy had no nationality. It was not given by victors, and not taken by the defeated. It was built, patiently, painfully, by those who dared to see humanity in the mirror of their enemy. The convoy disappeared down the road. In the distance, the infirmary flag fluttered, half Red Cross, half shadow, both part of the same wind. And for the first time since the war began, Anna allowed herself to believe that forgiveness was possible, not as a pardon, but as a promise.
September 1945 arrived with a gray light that seemed to hang heavier than the clouds themselves. Germany was a nation suspended between ruins and memory. Hamburg's skyline, once proud and tall, now bore jagged silhouettes of destroyed spires. Streets were littered with rubble, burned-out cars, and the skeletal frames of homes. Yet life stirred among the debris. Children chased through broken courtyards, and vendors set up makeshift stalls, selling what little could be found. Anna Weiss stepped from the transport truck, her hands clutching a small bundle of belongings collected during her time in France. Beside her, Greta Merler and Lieselotte Hartmann adjusted their coats against the early autumn chill. They had returned as freed prisoners, yet they felt as if they carried the weight of the entire war on their shoulders. For months they had worked in Allied camps, nursing survivors of concentration camps and refugees displaced by the chaos. They had learned that compassion could transcend nationality, that mercy could survive even amidst enmity. And now they faced the question, could it survive here, in a country that had been taught to fear and despise both enemy and self? Their first steps through Hamburg were jarring. Streets were uneven from collapsed tram lines, and buildings leaned precariously over open ditches. Anna noticed families huddled in partially intact apartments, faces drawn with exhaustion, suspicion, and hunger. When she spoke in German, some recoiled, their memories of soldiers and Gestapo still fresh. Others paused, wary curiosity flickering in their eyes. Greta bent to offer a small loaf of bread to a child sitting on the steps of a bombed-out building. The boy stared at her, then at the loaf, and slowly took it. A neighbor muttered a low warning, but the simple gesture spread, small threads of trust weaving across the street. It was a beginning. Within a week, the 3 nurses were assigned to a local hospital, partially restored, partially improvised. The building had survived aerial bombardments, with only its walls intact. The roof had been patched with scavenged wood and canvas. Inside, wards were crowded with civilians wounded by falling debris, malnourished children, and elderly patients too frail to manage in makeshift shelters. Anna found herself at the head of a small medical team. Greta oversaw sanitation and triage. Lieselotte handled supplies and ration distribution. Their experience in Allied camps, working alongside former enemies, caring for those they had once considered outsiders, was now their guiding principle. For the first time, they treated not prisoners, but neighbors, citizens, and children who were their own. Yet the lessons remained the same: dignity, patience, and the quiet power of human connection. One morning, Anna walked through a ward where children slept on thin mattresses laid across pallets. A boy of 9 stirred and opened his eyes. His hair was tangled, his lips chapped, but when Anna knelt to check his pulse, he smiled. "You are German," he said softly. "Yes, and I am here to help." He hesitated, then nodded. It was a small gesture, but it carried the weight of the war's impossible distance closing. Outside, the city itself became a classroom in rebuilding. The nurses visited neighbors, taught hygiene, and demonstrated how to make rudimentary yet clean water systems.
Greta instructed a group of women on sanitation methods she had learned in France, showing them how to boil water, wash linens properly, and disinfect cooking areas. Lieselotte held workshops on nutrition, using scraps and rationed items to create balanced meals for families who had survived months on bread and soup. These lessons were met with skepticism at first. Some whispered that former POW nurses could not be trusted. Others were openly hostile, accusing them of serving the enemy. But with each act of kindness, each healed wound, each shared loaf of bread, suspicion softened. Anna often walked alone along the river, reflecting on her journey. She remembered the Polish girl in Camp Ashbury, the rabbi who had spoken of mercy, the red-haired British sergeant whose handshake had affirmed the humanity of former enemies. Here in Hamburg, she tried to carry those lessons into a landscape ravaged not only by bombs, but by ideology, fear, and despair. She began to record her observations and instructions in a journal, not for orders or inspection, but as a manual for living amidst ruins. Diagrams of clean water systems, instructions for makeshift bandages, notes on comforting traumatized children. Each page was a blueprint for survival, not just of bodies, but of hearts. One afternoon, Greta returned from a neighborhood visit with a group of mothers and children. Among them was a young woman, pale and weary, clutching a broken doll. She had been displaced from Lübeck, her family lost in the bombings. Greta handed her clean linen, boiled water, and food. Then, with gentle patience, she taught the girl to wash her doll and mend its torn clothes. It was a small act, almost trivial, yet for the girl, and for those who watched, it was transformative. Care, Anna realized, was a language stronger than fear. The weeks became months. Slowly, small communities emerged among the ruins. Families learned to share gardens, to rebuild homes, to care for one another. The nurses were no longer outsiders. They were guides, mentors, and friends. One evening, Anna and Lieselotte watched the sunset from a rooftop. The city was scarred, but smoke no longer rose from flames. Only the smell of bread and wood fires filled the air. Children's laughter echoed faintly from a nearby courtyard. Anna said quietly, "I once believed the world had forgotten mercy. Now I see. It never did. It only waited." Lieselotte nodded. "And we were lucky enough to carry it back." By winter, the hospital had grown into a hub for displaced families and former soldiers. The nurses' knowledge of Allied humanitarian methods allowed them to implement vaccination programs, teach modern hygiene, and establish makeshift classrooms. English phrases from their camp experiences became tools to communicate with international aid workers. Every day, they witnessed quiet miracles: a child walking without fever, a mother smiling over a cooked meal, a neighbor trusting another after months of suspicion. Even Anna, who had feared that returning home meant surrendering her soul to ruins, found hope in the simplest gestures: a clean bed, a shared cup of soup, a child's laughter. One cold December morning, Greta approached Anna with a small parcel. Inside were letters from former patients in France, Polish, French, and British, thanking them for their care. Some letters were folded into small squares, their edges worn, their words trembling with emotion. Anna read them silently. Across the page, one sentence stood out: "Mercy can survive war. We carry it because you showed us how." She folded the letter carefully, placing it next to her journal. The war had ended months ago, but its lessons persisted. Humanity, she realized, was not defined by borders, uniforms, or victories. It was defined by the choice to help when it mattered most. In the ruins of Hamburg, the nurses continued their work. They tended to the wounded, instructed the curious, comforted the frightened, and healed the grieving. Through acts of care, of patience, of persistent kindness, they rebuilt not only a city, but the fragile trust that war had nearly destroyed. And though the future remained uncertain, one truth was clear. Even among ashes, hope could grow.
Spring of 1946 arrived softly over Hamburg. The air carried the scent of thawing earth and budding gardens, tentative signs of life returning after the winter of devastation. Rubble still lined the streets, but cranes, carts, and determined hands reshaped the cityscape. The war had left scars deep and permanent, yet the people moved forward, quietly determined. Anna Weiss stood at the entrance of the hospital, watching a group of children line up for a simple health check. Their cheeks were flushed with cold, their eyes bright with curiosity. Some carried books salvaged from wrecked schools, others clutched dolls and small toys. Beside her, Greta and Lieselotte oversaw volunteers, local women who had returned to the city, eager to help. The nurses now taught not just medicine and hygiene, but patience, compassion, and trust. Skills learned in the Allied camps were being adapted for a Germany learning to care for itself again. Anna knelt beside a young boy, examining a small cut on his knee. "We clean, then cover," she said gently. The boy winced, but nodded, eyes wide. "Do it again?" he asked. Anna smiled. She washed the wound, wrapped it carefully, and placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. Nearby, Greta led a small class in rudimentary sanitation techniques, showing women how to purify water using charcoal and sand, how to construct makeshift latrines safely, and how to prevent illness in crowded homes. Each demonstration was met with earnest attention and cautious smiles. Lieselotte directed a workshop on nutrition, guiding mothers to stretch limited rations into balanced meals. She displayed powdered milk, dried vegetables, and boiled grains, demonstrating that even scarcity could be met with ingenuity and care. Mothers scribbled notes, repeating instructions to each other as if they were precious secrets. The hospital wards no longer smelled solely of antiseptic. Now they carried the aroma of fresh bread baked by local volunteers, the faint perfume of flowers brought by children, and the soft hum of conversation. Patients, once silent with fear, now spoke freely. Words of thanks and laughter mixed with instructions and lessons. Evening came, and Anna walked along the riverbank. She observed the city's reconstruction, scaffolds rising from bombed foundations, carpenters hammering beams, women tending small plots of vegetables. It was slow work, but each gesture carried defiance against the destruction. She reflected on her time in the Allied camps, the Polish girl clutching the small badge, the rabbi who spoke of mercy, the Red Cross volunteers who had shown that care was possible even for enemies. Those lessons were now rooted here, among survivors and citizens alike. One afternoon, a train arrived from Lübeck, carrying displaced families and former patients returning to their homes. The nurses greeted them, assessing needs and distributing supplies. Among the new arrivals was the young girl Greta had helped months before, now taller, cleaner, and carrying a small bundle of clothes. When she saw Greta, her eyes lit up, and she ran forward to embrace the nurse. It was a scene repeated across the platform. Children holding hands with their caregivers, mothers bowing slightly in gratitude, elderly men offering quiet nods. Trust, built patiently over months, had begun to flow outward.
The nurses also began teaching practical skills that went beyond medicine. Anna led classes in water purification and hygiene, Greta in sanitation and household management, Lieselot in nutrition and basic food preservation. Each lesson was not just about survival, it was about restoring dignity. During these sessions, Anna noticed subtle changes in the adults she taught. Faces that had once been drawn with suspicion softened. Voices that had whispered doubts now asked questions, repeated instructions, and passed them along to others. Children absorbed the lessons eagerly, copying procedures carefully and correcting each other gently. In the evenings, the nurses gathered in a small garden behind the hospital. They shared letters from former Allied camps, updates on Polish and French patients, and notes from the families they had helped return to Lübeck, Kiel, and beyond. These letters were treasures, affirmations that the work they had begun in captivity now rippled across nations. One evening, Mary Douglas, the British nurse Anna had met in France, arrived with a small package of supplies, medical kits, clean linens, and a few Red Cross newsletters. They were gifts, yes, but also symbols. Mercy, compassion, and humanity did not end with war. They could travel, rebuild, and endure. Winter of 1946 brought snow to Hamburg. The nurses continued their work, now fully integrated into the community. Clinics ran smoothly, schools reopened and patched buildings, and neighborhoods organized volunteer networks. Scarcity remained, yet the people learned that even small acts of care could transform despair into hope. Anna often walked through the city at dusk, watching children sled down rubble-strewn streets, listening to the laughter of mothers preparing evening meals, hearing the tentative conversations of neighbors once separated by fear. It was a quiet revolution, a reclamation of humanity, one act at a time. Greta, standing beside a makeshift greenhouse, marveled at the rows of vegetables thriving in the northern soil. "They're learning patience," she said softly, "and they're teaching it back." Lieselot nodded. "We only showed them the way. They carry it now." By the spring of 1947, Hamburg had changed significantly. Streets were cleared, small markets flourished, and homes were being repaired. The nurses had trained local women to continue health and sanitation programs independently. Clinics ran with local staff. The children they had treated now helped younger siblings, passing along the lessons learned. Anna reflected on her journey. She had returned to a broken homeland, carrying the lessons of mercy and humanity learned under captivity. Those lessons had not only helped the survivors, but also transformed her own sense of self. Compassion, she realized, was neither weakness nor obligation. It was the foundation of rebuilding, a force capable of restoring communities devastated by war. And in the quiet moments, when she paused to watch the sun set over the rebuilt rooftops, Anna understood a truth she had glimpsed months before. Even among ruins, hope could grow, resilient and enduring, carried forward by those willing to care.